Okay, this video is about Chapter 9, Competitive Markets for Goods and Services. And this is the first of 3 chapters that we'll study which focus on the structure of markets. And here is a figure that illustrates what we mean by the structure of markets. So on one end we have perfect competition. And this is the topic of this chapter. We're going to analyze markets that are perfectly competitive. On the opposite end, we have markets where there's no competition. There's one seller. And the word monopoly is Greek for one seller. And so this is essentially the difference between these two markets. Here we have many sellers, and we'll see in a moment a few other assumptions underlie this concept of perfect competition. But at this point, the most important thing for you to know is that this is many sellers, and then this is one seller. And then we're going to look at some markets that are in between. So some closer to the monopoly end are called oligopoly. And then some that are more closer to competition are called monopolistic competition. So today we talk about perfect competition. Next time we'll talk about monopoly. And then after that, we'll talk about these in-between cases. So oligopoly is this case where you have a few sellers, like maybe 2 or 3. And this is really interesting to analyze because the action of one seller influences what the other sellers do. In other words, it's a strategic situation. Here, there's no strategic situations because there's only one seller. And here, there's really no strategic situations either because there are so many sellers that the actions of any one seller have no impact on outcomes in the market. So in this section 1, we really are just explaining what we mean by perfect competition and identifying the basic assumptions. So here are the assumptions of the model. First of all, people are price takers. The sellers are price takers. They can't charge whatever they want, right? They can charge the market price. Goods are identical. Think about wheat or some agricultural commodity. The wheat grown by one farmer is pretty much identical to the wheat grown by another farmer. Right? Now, I know that there are some limitations to that because, for example, some wheat is organic and some is not. But imagine that we're talking about a homogeneous product. As we already said, there are a large number of sellers, also a large number of buyers. You could have a situation where there's only one buyer, and that's called monopsony. So monopoly is one seller, monopsony is one buyer. And we're not going to study that in this course. We could. It's covered in the textbook, but we're going to move on to other topics. But in any case, perfect competition involves a large number of both buyers and sellers. Also important, entering the market and exiting the market is easy. So if you're an entrepreneur and you want to enter this market, it's very easy for you to do so. Imagine like a lemonade stand. You buy the lemonade stand, you buy some lemons and some sugar, and you set it up and you're in business. And then if 2 weeks later you decide that was not a good idea, it's very easy for you to sell your stand and exit the industry. Now, not all industries are easy to enter and exit, right? Sometimes there are high startup costs, or when you want to exit, you have to say you want to get out of some manufacturing business, you have to put your factory on the market and wait for a buyer to come along, right? That could take many months or even maybe years. So entry and exit is not always easy, but in perfectly competitive markets, it is. Finally, we assume that everyone has complete information. That means all the sellers know what everyone else is charging, and all the buyers know that the characteristics of the product, and so on. So we talked about market failure before the midterm. And does anybody recall some of the reasons why markets might fail to bring about an efficient outcome? Public goods, for example, we don't have efficient outcomes. So what's a public good? It's a good that you can't exclude people from consuming. And that's really the problem. The other characteristic is one person consuming it doesn't inhibit another person from consuming it. But the reason it leads to market failure is because of this non-excludability. So then, who's going to provide it in the first place, right? If it's national defense, who's going to provide it? So then this is the rationale for government. Because of the free rider problem, no one will provide it. So the government comes in and provides it and it taxes people to pay for it. And there are other situations, other public goods. For example, maybe basic research. Like the Pythagorean theorem is a piece of information that's non-excludable and non-rival. But how did we create this piece of information? Well, somebody funded Pythagoras to come up with this, right? And so therefore today we have the same type of thing in research universities where we fund research because otherwise the findings of this research are available to everyone and they're not able to make money on that. And so we have to find other ways to finance the production of this type of things. Well, this is another example. Information is another example of where markets could fail. There are a variety of ways in which markets could fail, and we'll come back to this topic. For now, these are all just assumptions of the perfect competition model. Of course, this is a model, and there probably is no market that accurately resembles a perfectly competitive market, textbook market, but many do, and many are close enough so that the model of perfect competition is useful. And then there's one other thing I wanted to say at the beginning as kind of motivation. In Chapter 9, we study competitive markets. And economists love competitive markets. The reason, as we'll see in a subsequent lecture, is that the forces of competition ensure that all products, goods and services, are sold at cost. And so competitive markets are great for consumers. You can get any good or service that you want at the cost of production. And it's very difficult to think of any other economic arrangement that could supply goods and services at cost like competitive markets do. So even though in some situations markets may fail, really the point of this chapter is to highlight the beauty of markets. Any questions?